Congressman, tell me what the study group has recommended. These seem like very, very large cuts. What's the game here?
Well, I don't know if it would be considered a large cut on it. It's the beginning point. We've got to get started on pulling our debt down. And this is the beginning to say, let's start gathering ideas from all over the place, from many different voices. Everyone throw in your ideas and let's begin making stew.
You call it a beginning, but now the numbers we're talking about are big numbers. $2.5 trillion over 10 years. How do you achieve that level of spending reduction without a tremendous impact across the economy? How do you do that?
Okay, well, let's begin with the basics on it. We have to evaluate what's more important at this point, to start pulling down our debt and our deficit, or just continue spending at our current levels. I would be a proponent of saying, and there are many others that are around me that would say, we've got to start stabilizing our economy, and one of the ways that you stabilize the economy is by not having such a heavy debt load. I mean, you can look at California, you can look at Illinois, you can look at Greece, and you can look around the world, and you can see what a heavy debt load is doing to their economy. We're spending almost $200 billion a year just in interest payments. We've got to pull our debt down so that we can actually be investing into people. Let
me ask you this. In trying to, it's kind of a two-sided problem here because we have the big debt, as you mentioned, but we also have unemployment that's around 9.7, 9.8%. These kinds of reductions, are these job killers or job creators? Where do you think this comes out?
Well, I think there'd be job creators on it. We dumped $1 trillion of additional debt onto the budget and into the economy 2 years ago, and we've not seen a growth in job development there. We've seen it begin to stabilize, and eventually now we're still hovering almost 10%. So to say continue to run up debt and deficit's going to create more jobs, I think has not been proven out in the last 2 years. So we've got to start pulling this back. I mean, basically what we're saying at this point is times are really tough on us, and so we'll make it tougher on our grandchildren, so it's easier on us. And I just don't think that's rational. I don't think any other generation in American history, in fact, has said times are tough, so let's make it tougher on the next group, so it's easy on us.
But if you cut government by this amount, you're going to inevitably cut government jobs. Can the private sector make up for those kinds of cuts?
Absolutely. It is interesting. In the last 2 years, government has been talking about let's increase jobs, and the way they've tried to increase jobs is through government jobs. I don't think we spur the economy and we increase more growth across all of our economy by hiring more and more people from the federal workforce. We've got to start spurring private job growth. We can't just take from one person and start a job on another one. We've got to start building the economy, and you do that in the private sector, not in the public sector.
Okay, let's talk about the political reality here. It is true that the Republicans now have the hammer in the House. You're part of the new class coming in there with ideas to streamline the government. You've made these pledges to the voters. But in the Senate, the Democrats are still in control, and of course President Obama is still at the White House. So this kind of plan, $2.5 trillion over 10 years, isn't that politically dead on arrival at the Senate?
I would disagree. I would think this is a great time. In fact, the president has helped lead the way in this area. You look back just a few months ago, everyone was talking about the president's fiscal debt reduction plan and all this proposal and this commission that he had. And the president's fiscal plan, many of the items that are in this RSC plan were actually in the president's plan just a few months ago. Of course, a few months ago, everyone was saying, this is a great plan and we need to look at it. Now the Republicans have proposed it. They're saying, isn't this draconian? In reality, it's a good time for Republicans and Democrats to come to the table. I don't think that just Republicans have an issue on debt reduction. This is a bipartisan issue to say, let's bring as many people as we can. In the past, it was one party, one person brings up some proposal and everyone just votes. This year, it's stone soup. Everybody bring their ideas, gather it all together and say what needs to be done. Let's look at the best ideas from everyone. But the reality is we've got to pull this debt back.
Okay, but you started out by saying this is a starting point. So let me ask you this. Is this an opening negotiation point? How much room is there here for compromise or bend? I mean, does it have to be $2.5 trillion? Would you settle for less than that?
Oh, I would say it's an opening starting point, because I really do believe the Democrats are going to come and they're going to say, well, I don't like that idea at all. And we're going to respond with, great. You know as well as we do, we've got to pull back the debt and the deficit. What's your idea? So when I say it's a starting point, I mean, we're opening this up and setting it in front of everyone and saying, great, we need to get started doing something. Here are some ideas. What are your ideas?
Okay, let me ask you,
let's bring those things to the table.
Let me ask you one specific. Now, this is according to the Washington Post analysis. So I will say the Post looked at your proposals. They come up with this, that some 4,000 FBI agents, for example, would be out of work if these cuts went through. Now, the reality is we have a problem. You don't think that number is legitimate?
No, I don't think that's the way. It's the immediate response to say if a local government has to go cut back, the immediate thing it said is, oh, police officers and firemen are going to be fired, and that's the most outrageous type quote on it. The immediate response is if we cut it, we're going to be losing all these. We don't have to do across-the-board cuts. It doesn't have to be cuts in areas that are irrational. So to say we're going to put all these FBI agents out on the street is just not consistent and rational with the reality.
Okay, but are there enough non-discretionary areas to make this depth of cuts without affecting things like FBI agents or Homeland Security officials?
Yes. And in fact, this proposal takes defense and Homeland Security off the table for immediate things that we're looking at. Now, honestly, everything has to be on the table long term. Everything should be done in the most fiscally efficient way that we possibly can. I don't think there's anyone that's going to say our government runs the most efficient of any company in America. That's just not true. The nature of government is inefficiency. The way you make government more efficient is to make it smaller. We all understand those realities on it. But the particular proposals we're trying to put on the table initially to say let's start dealing with this year, you can't do in Homeland Security and defense and such.
All right.
$666 billion in non-defense discretionary spending is out there. That's what we're talking about beginning to say, where do we find cuts there?
All right, and last question, and thank you for your patience here. You're
Sure.
going to be up against an immediate problem here in March with the debt ceiling.
Yes, we are.
Are your Republican colleagues prepared to consider approving a raise in the debt ceiling? And what's the negotiating strategy? Are you willing to trade something for that?
Well, the conversation about the debt ceiling is not an easy one because people assume this is to deal with the debts for future times on it. And in reality, that is somewhat true, but really what we're dealing with is these are things that have already been done and paid for. This is a lot of money that's already been spent, and we're having to deal with the reality. I'm one of those 87 Republican freshmen that's coming into the House of Representatives, and I feel like I'm walking into a situation where all these bills have already been spent. They're sitting there saying, okay, we have no money, now what do we do? You're not going to fix that immediately. The only way to resolve that is $1.4 trillion in debt reductions this year. That's not possible. So we are going to have to do it, but I do think it has to be attached to something. We can't keep spending this way.
Will you vote to raise the debt ceiling?
I will vote to raise the debt ceiling only if we can have major, significant cuts in the future that we can actually put in the system. If we're going to start dealing with paying off these debts, I'd like for us to also start dealing with cutting up the credit cards and saying we cannot continue to do this. And that's what the conversation is right now. And honestly, Republicans and Democrats are having that conversation. How do we slow down the growth of all this spending and get us back on track? And that's a good conversation for us to be in right now.
All right, Congressman James Lankford from Oklahoma, thanks very much for joining us.
Glad to be here.